How's it going, everyone? This is MedCat here, and today we're going to be talking about a few tips for test day that I think are pretty helpful. You won't find any new exclusive information in this video, but I did want to make a compilation to make it as easy as possible for you guys to know exactly what you need to do before the exam, during the exam, and after the exam on test day. So let's start with this first bullet point. First and foremost, we need to obey our overlords, the AAMC, and I'll be linking this down in the description here, but we definitely want to know what they want us to know on test day, of course. But we're going to go a bit beyond that with bullet point number 2. We definitely want to know where our test center is exactly, and the biggest thing to do beforehand is drive to it beforehand. Or if you're in a city with good public transportation, probably not a lot of cities like that in America for most people, but you're going to probably want to drive to it beforehand, or if you're in a big city, use the bus or some public transportation for that. Second, we're going to want to know where to park and if you have to pay for parking. This is something that I didn't anticipate, and I drove twice to my test center because I forgot to look for parking. So make sure you look for parking, especially because a lot of those PearsonVUE centers where the MCAT is actually administered are in downtown areas where parking can be a little bit difficult. The last thing you want to do is get done with your exam and then find out your car is towed because you parked at a 2-hour meter with an hour time limit of 2 minutes rather than parking at a parking garage that let you stay a little bit longer. Third thing we want to do is make sure we can get in the building and where exactly in the building the testing center is. This might be less of an issue for people nowadays. I took my MCAT exam, the first offering during the COVID kind of era of MCAT exams, and they had the building closed to the general public due to COVID, and there was actually a unique system where you had to call in on like a loudspeaker, check in, say exactly where you were going, etc. So just in case, make sure you can actually get in the building and know where in the building your testing center is, because it's unlikely that the entire building where that PearsonVUE testing center is going to be entirely dedicated to the MCAT. Third thing we want to go over is get there early. That's probably, goes without saying, but if something unexpected happens, and don't worry about this too much, but it could happen, your car breaking down, road closed, or a detour, etc., you can call in for backup. And that brings me into point number 4, which is, of course, we need to have some backup method of transportation. Ideally, this could be family or friends, but if you're in an area, let's say you had to travel for your MCAT exam, this could also be Uber or Lyft if you really needed it. Obviously, this isn't ideal because it could cost a little bit more, but nevertheless, Uber or Lyft could be a backup option because if you miss your exam, obviously you're $300 down the hole anyways. Fifth point here is bring a mask. Up to the point that I'm making this video in June 2021, it looks like PearsonVUE is still requiring masks and backup masks. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's a mask that you're comfortable with, and ideally kind of the same type of reusable mask that you've been practicing with. So you can use a cloth mask that you reuse and wash, or you can use, of course, a disposable mask. I chose to use kind of a surgical, more disposable mask because it was a bit more breathable for me. And yeah, so number 5 there. Just make sure, it's covering your nose and mouth and using your common sense, as, you're going into healthcare. Number 6 here. We want to bring water and snacks to test day. This is kind of personal, but you can bring whatever you want. I chose to bring water and snacks and not too much coffee because I tried to wean myself off caffeine before my exam because you're not going to get coffee breaks in a traditional sense here. And one thing to keep in mind is that at these PearsonVUE testing sites, you actually get to keep these in a locker and access them during breaks. Don't get in the habit, though, of spending too much time eating and drinking during your breaks because those breaks are shorter than you may think. Number 7, bring your ID. You definitely want to know this one because you cannot get into your exam without one. Make sure your ID is in line with the AAMC standards. The standards are basically that you need to have some sort of legal identification like a driver's license or a passport. I chose to bring both of mine. If you don't have a passport, that's fine, but I chose to bring both just in case something happened with one of them. It probably won't, but just in case there. Number 8, you don't need to bring any pencils, test material, etc. In fact, I actually wouldn't bring anything test related with you, as cramming obviously isn't going to be useful for an exam with such broad material, and it also might look suspicious to the test proctors, and the last thing you want, of course, is for someone suspecting you of cheating when you're obviously not cheating. And finally, make sure you silence and turn off your phone before you put it in your locker. Now, number 9, let's break into some tips about during the exam. So the tutorial section that you may have seen in your AAMC practice exams, and I really hope you've taken AAMC practice exams before you take the exam, it's pretty vital. That tutorial section isn't really useful to most people, so I recommend you use this time to experiment with the earplugs and the headphones they provide you with. Okay, so they bring in 2 types of noise cancellation for you. They have those over-the-ear headphones that look really bulky and that people that work on the ground at airports use to block out the sound from airplanes. And so they're pretty heavy duty. They are a little mildly uncomfortable. You can also use earplugs with them. I felt like I didn't need them at first, but sometimes the background noise, people checking in and checking out can kind of bother you, so I actually ended up using a combination of them, where I put the earplugs in and the headphones over those so I could hear pretty much absolutely nothing. So I recommend using both those earplugs and headphones if they are comfortable for you. 10. Don't mutter questions to yourself, as there is no talking allowed during the exam. My specific testing site made a very big point of this. I don't know if they had a problem with this recently, but you are in an isolated testing center and you want to be on the straight and narrow as much as possible. So don't be talking to yourself because they may think you're trying to pass off answers to the person maybe testing next to you, etc. Number 11, you will have to check in and out if you choose to leave the testing room between sections, which you'll probably want to do to eat and use the restroom. But one thing to keep in mind is that you'll need to check in and check out, and what that consists of, especially in the era of COVID, is doing a palm scan, and also you're going to have to take your mask on and off to show that you're not putting any sort of testing material inside your mask to cheat on the exam with. So be really careful to make sure that you're using your time very efficiently, because the last thing you want to do is get in there and see that your next section has already started while you were outside checking in. Number 12 here. Last thing to do during the exam, don't void your exam unless you experience a serious interruption in your test, like a fire alarm. This is something that I see over and over again, reiterated in different MCAT tutoring sites, and it's a really good rule because, as a general rule, nearly everyone feels like they did poorly after finishing taking their MCAT, regardless of how you actually did. A lot of people, when they take practice exams, they feel really awful. They hate to submit that final psych-soc section because they feel like they did really bad. And then, of course, they end up scoring a lot better than they think they did, as a general rule. So don't void your exam. And if you don't void your exam, the nice thing is point number 13, you'll actually get a piece of paper printed out that confirms you didn't void your exam. So in case you're worried that you accidentally did, you'll get that piece of paper, and then if the AAMC makes an error and thinks you voided it, you have that piece of paper that you can submit to them and say, hey, I chose to have my exam scored. I don't know what went on there. Number 14, don't talk about the content of the exam. This is against the AAMC's rules, so it might be tempting to talk about it with your friends, but resist the temptation, okay? And you can find more information about that, again, in the links below. And then 15, go do something fun, because it is a brutal examination. There's going to be a lot of anxiety and stress inherent in just taking the exam. So don't do anything difficult for the rest of the day. If you can, just go do something fun. That's it for today's MedCat video. Feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, and check out my comprehensive amino acid playlist, which can be found in the link in the description below.